Well, we landed at Keflavik, and then we took the shuttle, the 1-hour bus ride to Reykjavik. Just got to Reykjavik and found a place right at the bus terminal to put our luggage, luggage lockers, and put our luggage and headed into town.
Once we got there, it was a really easy walk from the bus terminal up to the main area. Nancy knew exactly where to go, right through the churchyard and up the...
Go to the church.
Exactly, right following up there. So that was really easy. There wasn't any problems. The first place we stopped was the big church. That was really cool. But I was struck by the fact that it really isn't that old. But it was beautiful inside. The pipe organ was amazing. Go ahead.
Yeah, we went and found a great little spot for breakfast. We had some little cafe on one of those little side streets, and so that was really good because having a nice latte and sitting and relaxing after that evening of flying and stuff was a good refresher.
But what struck me about the streets there are the amazing buildings, the colors, the various colors that were all over the graffiti everywhere.
Amazing.
But so well done. Yeah,
very
so
tasteful.
well done. Really nice. But it was interesting. Then we went down to the waterfront, and on the waterfront, Nancy really wanted us to go see Harpa, which is the big concert hall, and we were walking that way, and then there was all of these police and all of these police with machine guns, and I thought, what's going on? And it ended up the European Union was meeting there that day. And
No access. So.
But I don't think Iceland's part of the EU, so I didn't quite get that, but who knows? Yeah. Our domestic flight from Reykjavik, the Reykjavik airport to the domestic airport to Hop was supposed to be at 4:30, and so we thought, we'll just go over to the domestic airport and it'll be really easy. And so by the time we'd kind of walked all the way around the downtown area, we were all so tired we really kind of just wanted to sit in the airport and wait.
There was a small plane. I think I had just one seat, and then there were 2 seats across the aisle. So stuff jammed in. It was a fine flight. I just remember it was very floaty, but a little prop plane.
But what was kind of cool about it is that you could see the glacier as we flew over it. That was pretty cool.
And what was cool when we landed in Hup too is that you could see the glaciers. There was like 3 different areas where this glacier came down to this area, which was very cool. But yeah, then the milk factory was a really sweet spot.
One of my favorites.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was just so clean, and everything essential was there. And in our place, we had an upper and a lower bed bunking kind of thing, but there were like 4 cabinets to put your stuff. And just the fact that when you're traveling from place to place and you have suitcases, you need places to put your stuff, and we didn't always have that.
Yep. The people there were very friendly. It had a common area you could sit and have, congregate and stuff. It just had a really good feel to it. And then, so then we stayed there, unpacked a little bit, and then we just went right for dinner to the Pack House, which was great. Really good food, unique place. And then from there we headed to Vesterhorn, which was gorgeous. We had a beautiful evening, blue sky. We got to watch the sunset there.
Although it didn't really set.
Right, the sun lowering there. And lots of pictures were taken first night there, and there was some horses and just the view and
more horses.
Yep, and then there was the view, and then there were more horses. So at one point, when some people were taking pictures of horses, I just decided to go for a walk. We had reached the end of the road, and then you had to go back, so I just decided to go for a walk. And it was just really pleasant to walk, and it was peaceful, and I thoroughly enjoyed that walk. So we had breakfast at the milk factory that morning, and it was, I think, the best breakfast we had. They had these little parfaits of fruit and yogurt, and the cheeses and meats were really good, and hard-boiled eggs, and it was just a really sweet, nice setup. Yep, and then the lovely woman who was working there took our photo outside of the place, and she was really sweet and nice to talk to. And then we headed to Vesterhorn again, because the evening before the sun was setting on one side of the of the mountain, but we wanted to catch it with the sunrise on the other side of the mountain. So we headed out, but it was windy and cold. And so we went in. You go down through a gated area, and then you get to the Viking village.
We went to the Viking village. And that was, again, it was like you said, a little windy. We had such beautiful weather the day before. And so we walk over to the Viking village, and it really was pretty cool. It had an old Viking ship and beautiful carvings around the doors. And so it was pretty fun. And then we walked over, and we drove actually to the peak or the point so that we could then take a look at Vesterhorn. And when we got there, everything had clouded over, and it was like foggy.
It started pouring.
Yes, it
started raining.
And so we thought, oh, we're going to have to go. We're not going to get to see it again. Somebody in the car said, let's just wait 5 more minutes.
I believe it was Jim.
And in 5 minutes, it parted. And it was gorgeous.
It was amazing. Yeah, the colors of the sky, and yes, and the black sand. And one of my favorite videos was when Jim took the video of the sand whipping, the black sand. It looked really cool.
Amazing.
Yep.
I mean, do you feel like you were on the moon? You know, it was so amazing. And but the colors, like you said, along the mountain that shifted, and the reflection of the clouds on the mountain, it was beautiful. And
then we headed to, do you remember how far down the road it was? Glacial Bay? Was it?
It wasn't real far, but it was a beautiful glacier bay. And what was attractive to me right away was that the fact that there were some eider ducks floating around in the bay, and also a seal. And there were quite a few people, and you could actually go out in kayaks or on kind of a pontoony thing and scoot around, but we were just walking the trail and enjoying the views of the glacier and the ice that was actually cracking off and moving right while we were there, which was kind of amazing to me.
Yep, you could hear the cracks. Then all of a sudden there would be this ice breaking away. Then it would eventually flow out of the bay, and then into the area out in the ocean that was then this area called Diamond Beach,
which we also visited.
Yep, we visited that. So it's little chunks of the ice that's broken off the glaciers that then collects along the beach, which was very cool. And again, the Black Beach. So that was really interesting to see. So then from there we headed further down the road, and we went to an area that has a big waterfall. So we had this road that went back in there was very rocky, very crazy to drive on, but ended up back in that area. And then 4 of us started hiking. Eventually got up to this area where there was this beautiful waterfall. And the view was spectacular, and honestly, that was one of my favorites, is that area up there.
Yeah, it was a little bit challenging. I wasn't sure how far I was going to go. Susan and I Jim and Julie just kind of took off, and they even went off the normal path and started hiking up someplace where I knew I didn't want to go. And then Susan and I made kind of another path around, and then it was getting a little tricky, but I decided to push on, and I was with a few other people, so I kind of knew where to go, and I got to a point where I had a very nice view down into the canyon and of a waterfall, and I felt like that was as far as I wanted to go. And so I sat there for quite a while, took pictures, just enjoyed that beautiful view, and then I started going back, and I started to think, I wonder if I'm actually holding up our whole group. And I started moving rather quickly, and I actually got off the main trail and ended up in brush and had to backtrack and try to find where my trail was. But I got back to the car, and Susan was there, and then we hung out and talked for a while, waiting for Julie and Jim to complete their hike, which took quite a while. We were not concerned, but it was like they really did it all. And we checked in, and it was a little cabin, and it was kind of divided. We had 2 little rooms and then a shared bath in the middle. And the rooms were quite tiny, but adequate, although we noticed there was blackout on the windows because it doesn't get dark in the summer. So they had that and curtains. And then, but we also had little tables, which we immediately realized we needed to put the tables together and have a place to play cards and have a good night after our dinner, which we did.
Yep, we had a nice dinner on site, and then the meal was very good, but what stood out was the staff. Our waiter was from Moldova, and yeah, it was just really fun to see all the people that were, not Icelandic. They're coming from all over to, work, and but yeah, we spent the evening just playing cards. We had a box of wine, the box of wine I'd brought, so we had that up on a shelf, and Nancy was sitting underneath that, and we were playing cards, and it was very fun.
We got up after a fun night of cards and had our breakfast at the cabin in the dining room. It was very nice, and then we headed off to this canyon that was hard to pronounce, but we knew that Justin Bieber had done a video there, and it was a very beautiful canyon. And we got into the parking lot, a lot of people there, and there's a path that leads up, and it's kind of moody, rainy, wet, but kind of beautiful too.
One thing that I looked up today was that after Justin Bieber did his video, he had 440 million views.
Wow.
And so a lot of people knew about this place, and one of the problems is that it got kind of overrun, and they actually closed it they were only open for 5 weeks a year for a couple of years to let it recover. And now they've at least built walkways, and they have fences so knuckleheads can't go and fall off the edge. And there are several vantage points up there. It's beautiful. You've got views of the waterfall coming down, and then the river roaring down off in the distance.
It's very misty and very green.
Yeah.
A lot of green against that funky rock. And I saw some ducks, and I actually got interested in the ducks and took pictures of the ducks kind of launching themselves off the cliffs and flying around, and they were quite beautiful. Very nice to see, and enjoyed that hike very much. So we drove to this little teeny tiny town. It's got a long name, which I cannot pronounce, but we explored this area where there was a little hiking trail up to the top, and then there was kind of a little pond area, and it had some story about nuns bathing there. And it was kind of curious, and we wandered around and enjoyed that. But from that vantage point, Julie found that there was a swimming pool in the town, and we knew that the swimming pools were heated by the volcanic activity in the area, and so we thought, oh, let's go to the pool. So after we wandered around and enjoyed the hike and had a lovely picnic, we moved into the town to go to this swimming pool.
Yeah, so it was a kind of a community center for that area. And, kids were in there in a gym playing soccer. It was kind of a normal community center kind of place. And so we paid our money and kind of worked our way into the locker rooms. And I went trudging down the hall and into my locker room with my shoes on, and found out later that was definitely against the rules, and the girls all got yelled at for not taking their shoes off, but I was just an oblivious tourist, so I just went in there. And then we went out into the pool, and there were 3 separate pools. There were different temperatures, 2 hot tubs, and then a bigger swimming pool that you could swim in, and they were all warm, different degrees of water. But I remember just laying there, and you could look up at the waterfall and the bluff above, and just how idyllic could that
And
get?
all of a sudden, and the sun burst forth, and you know, we've had lots of rain and bad weather and cool weather, and just having all of a sudden a sunny interlude, which was very welcome.
And so we had a couple hours to kill and decided to just take a sort of random drive. We found a loop, a highway, 204, that just kind of went off the main road. So we started driving on that, not knowing quite what we would see out there. And it was pretty remarkable for a couple of reasons. One was, it was one of the barest wastelands I've ever seen. It was absolutely like being on the moon, but the terrain would change as we drove. And it was just so stark. I remember getting out and we walked around a little bit, took some pictures.
There were grasslands with kind of mounds that were kind of curious, and we stopped for those. And then we went into the lava fields, which was moss growing over lava, and just really
Strange.
very strange moon-like landscape.
Yeah.
And we took pictures there, and I took a picture of the ground at one point, of just a close-up of all the dark rocks and then the little kind of small little plants that were creeping along the surface. And I really liked it in a way, but it was very stark.
And we continued driving, and off in the distance we see a little church. Mm-hmm. This road is interesting because you would see, it was very sparsely populated, but every once in a while you'd see a farm way off in the distance. And I'm assuming
What
are
they farming?
What are they farming? Well, it wouldn't be farming, probably sheep, raising sheep or whatever. And so we saw this church and thought, well, let's just check it out. It was just a little side road, so we drove down there, and that was super interesting.
Yes.
Kind of a typical little country church from what we saw. They are all kind of very similar.
And then mounds of graves, old graves, but they were mounded up, and they were kind of encircling the churchyard. I think they couldn't dig very deep because of how rocky that area is. I think they just, in order to bury people, they probably just had to gather material and put it in a mound rather than dig deep.
So that was a great photo op, got a couple pictures there and continued along the road, and then eventually came to a big, like a river delta that was insanely wide, and it just makes you appreciate the scale of everything in Iceland. It's just, that's the thing that probably impressed me more than anything. The size of everything, this wasn't just a Minnesota river. This thing was maybe 5 miles across. It was just so primeval, and this drainage from the glaciers or wherever it was coming from. And again, just so kind of elemental. It's just rock and sky and water, and so we got a couple photos there. And I think eventually everybody got tired of me wanting to stop every 20 feet, so I had to kind of cut it short and get back in the car.
But it was also for me, knowing my grandmother was from this place, and I just thought of the hardship of living in such extreme conditions with harsh weather and not a very arable land. And so really they're reduced to the fishing industry and sheep, and how tough it was to make a living there and exist there.
So after we did our drive on Highway 204, we were still in the vicinity of Car Restaurant, which was right across from the waterfall. So we went back there and had a lovely dinner. The service was great. Mm-hmm. The place was staffed with eager young people from around Europe, and you know, the food was really good. I don't exactly remember what I had. It was probably char, because that was, the menus weren't extensive at any of the restaurants. You could usually get lamb or char, and if you got a salad, that was kind of a bonus.
I remember I had a seafood chowder, a cup of a seafood chowder, and a beet salad.
Very nice.
Which was very nice. Yes.
Yeah. And I can't remember, but I must have had dessert, because I always got dessert.
Yes.
So then we went back to Hunkebacker. And of course it was still quite light outside, which is always fabulous. There's no reason to go to bed unless you're really, really tired. You can stay up. And so we got back. I ate way too much, like I normally do. So I decided I would take a walk down the road, since we were on a very quiet road. And Nancy went across the street to take pictures of lambs and sheep, and ended up meeting the farmer, the family that owns Hunkebacker. And I just walked down the road, and there were a couple of this is typical, just roaring rivers, kind of unnamed, unmarked rivers that just roar down from the glaciers and down to the sea. And it was really cool to just go down and take pictures of that and check that out.
I think that was the evening then we ended up sitting in our room and playing cards. And then I believe you went to bed and we were playing in our room. So Nancy went to bed. Then Susan and I were up talking that evening. And then at some point, Nancy made some comment like, "Can you guys talk louder so I can hear you?" As we were trying to be quiet. So, and then we were also, was that the day we were playing cards, and we were also hanging our swimsuits out to dry. So in our room we had a clothesline going from one end to the other with swimsuits on it and towels, and we went to bed that night.
It was
that way.
It's like summer camp all over again.
It was.
When we were playing cards, all of a sudden the siren starts wailing, and we're panicking, you know, is the cabin on fire, or are we all gonna die? And we couldn't we knew it was in our room, but we didn't know how to turn it off. And so Susan ran up to the main house and came running back with our waiter from Moldova, and he went to work and pulled the battery out and calmed everything down. And we were okay after that.
So yeah, when all else fails, just take the battery out.
Take the battery out, exactly.
Yep.
We left our little cabins and headed on the road to the major metropolis of Vic.
Yep. So we got to Vic. It was maybe an hour and a half drive or so. It was a long drive to Vic. And we got there, and we immediately went out to this peninsula with a name that I cannot pronounce. Beautiful area. There was this big bay out one area. We went and there was the do you remember the arch, whatever that?
There's an arch and there's a black sand beach.
Yeah, so there was a bay that kind of looked like this, and we were up in this area, and then at one point Susan and I walked down kind of that overlooked this bay, and then later in the day we came back and we went to this other side, and I took a walk across this area. But yeah, it was beautiful, black beaches, but really windy and rainy.
Yeah.
Yep, and then we got done with that, and we decided to go back to Vic, and then we went to the lava experience place where there was the soup cafe or soup.
Yeah, soup kitchen.
Soup
Well,
kitchen,
whatever.
and
It was
we-
a good restaurant that we found, and had some nice warming soups, and
and regrouped.
we had very low expectations of the Puffin Hotel. And surprisingly, to all of us, I think, we had
Sweet.
very pleasant rooms.
Yeah.
And what we noticed, though, was that the Puffin Hotel was kind of an enclave of buildings, and more than just the main hotel, which I think we were in the main building that had been renovated. And so our rooms were actually quite pleasant, quite nice.
Well, we went to Black Beach after lunch, and it was where those columns are. I don't know, how would you describe them? The basalt.
The basalt columns that are so indicative of the geology of Iceland. And the waves were really, really big, crazy waves. And so we enjoyed looking at that and walking up and down the beach. And then Julie went a lot further than the rest of us, and we were starting to get worried that maybe a sneaker wave had gotten her.
Well, so I just started walking. It was just gorgeous. It was the waves coming in from the left, and just I could walk, and I could see the big rock that we had seen earlier from the other side. So I was kind of getting close to that, and I think I walked like 3 miles. But went there and back, and on the way back, I kind of wanted to get this picture of this one rock that was kind of in the water, and so I just thought I'm going to wait till the waves come, and they weren't coming up to me at all. So I'm waiting, and then I'd get this picture, and then the wave, it was maybe a small sneaker wave. And so I just started running, taking off and running, and I got my feet totally soaked and stuff. And unfortunately, Susan saw that in the distance.
I actually got caught by that wave.
Yeah. So yeah, but it was, I mean, again, that was a really favorite part of my trip, was just walking on that beach. It was just gorgeous. And then we spent the evening at the Puffin Hotel, sitting in the common area. We had picked up some beer at the local grocery store. So there was an area that had the Iceware, which is their kind of local, or the Icelandic clothing area. And then it was this kind of the small, and it had a grocery store. So we went into the grocery store, and we picked up more cheese, and we picked up some local beer, and we picked up some things. And then we had to try and figure out the self-checkout and trying to do that. And then we went back to the hotel, and we just sat and played cards and had a really lovely evening, just having appetizers and cocktails and playing games.
But one of the things that we decided to do before we left Vic is we went up to the church that was at the top of the hill, and it looked so picturesque and beautiful. And I think either you or Jim said, we really need to take a picture from that church.
Right.
And we went up there, and it was quite lovely.
Yeah, there was a cemetery there with some older rocks, and then there's a view of the beach and the little bit of town. And so it is a very nice viewpoint from that church.
But after we were leaving Vic, our journey was to get toward our next place to stay, but in between were 2 waterfalls. So our first waterfall for the day was Skagafoss. And Skagafoss is just gorgeous, lovely. Nancy and I got to enjoy it from the base, but Jim and Julie did explore to the top to see the river and the plateau at the top.
Yes, there was a nice overlook. We saw it, but we just decided to stay down at the base. There was a lot of people there, but it was quite lovely, except for all the rain and cloud and wind.
And it was exacerbated by the fact that there's the blowback, the wind of the falls. So the falls are basically coming at you. So, but then not very far down from that was another falls called Solafoss or something like that. Sorry.
Put the name on the screen.
But it's one of the most beautiful falls because it not only is it incredibly high, but you can actually walk behind it.
We were going to go back there, but it again, it was very wet and treacherous, and a woman fell while we were kind of walking toward the area to go behind the falls. And that's when we decided kind of to stop and say, okay, this is as far as we need to go. And then we started walking along the river to get views of the falls from another angle, whereas Julie and Jim went, of course, behind the falls because that's what they do.
And to see from behind and the falls in front of you, pretty amazing phenomenon.
Okay, so after we went to the second waterfall, it was getting a little bit late, and we hadn't had anything to eat for a while. So we went through the town of Selfoss, which is a pretty decent-sized commercial hub. lots of restaurants and gas stations and I mean, a regular little town, car
Yeah.
dealers, the whole deal.
From what we've seen, it was pretty big.
And I think it's kind of a big tourist hub as well. Anyway, so we were looking for lunch and we just looked on the internet and found Cafe Cruz. I don't know what I had for lunch. I think I might have had fish and chips or
I know I
something.
had fish and chips,
Yeah.
and it was very good.
Yeah, when we first talked about fish and chips, I was thinking of high school fish and chips like I used to get. And this was so good. It was really amazing and worth getting. And then they had really amazing desserts, which I had to.
I do remember that we all got beers, and they were very good beers there. I don't know why. Maybe it was because I was cold and wet and tired.
So then it was time, well, I guess it was always time to go to the cabin.
Well, we had to find our way to the cabin, and fortunately we had a good mapping program on our phone to find it, and we had good directions. So we were going to the Thingvellir cabin that was in the Thingvellir Park, and so, but it wasn't far from Selfos, just about a 3-minute drive.
It's kind of
Interesting.
in the boondocks.
Yeah.
It's very kind of a strange little area.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not heavily populated, and you get the feeling that people buy these little prefab huts that they just plop down, and that's their vacation home or whatever. These cabins are on an enormous lake, Thingvellir Lake, right? Huge, huge, huge lake.
Yep.
When we arrived at the house, the weather was horrible, like it had been now for at least a day.
Yeah.
And so we decided just to quick get all our stuff in the house and
Hang out a little bit.
hang out a little bit and wait for the weather to change.
Once we got all of our stuff into the cabin, we kind of explored the cabin a little bit, and it really was a cabin.
Very eclectically decorated with like knickknacks from their travels.
Yeah.
My favorite was the singing salmon on the wall
Yeah.
with a Santa hat on it.
Yeah.
That kind of tied the whole decor together.
It looked very rural Minnesota up north. So
Yeah, I don't know how long we were there, and eventually,
the sun came out.
miraculously, the sun came out spectacularly.
Somebody,
sun.
I think it was Julie, said, I think we need to go down to the lake and see, you know, just check it out. And so we start walking, and it's incredibly windy. Even though the sun's out, it's really, really windy.
Like 50 mile an hour.
And so Julie and Nancy go, and Jim and I were bringing up the rear, and then Jim forgot something.
My camera.
You forgot
Well, I wasn't going to take my camera, but it had quit raining.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh, wow, this is
So
my
he
chance.
went back to get his camera, and then he drove down, and then I joined Julie and Nancy. Julie was, laying on the park bench, soaking up the sun, enjoying it, but then we saw the beautiful rainbow come out. What an amazing sight to see. But there were white caps on that lake, and it was just so amazing. Rainbow, white caps.
At that point, it was probably evening,
Yeah.
I'm guessing.
And so then we said, oh, we'll just eat at home. And so Julie was always really good about keeping those leftovers from her meal that she didn't eat at lunch. So we had lots of little things to eat. And so we played cards and enjoyed ourselves at the cabin that evening, probably went to bed early. I would wake up personally every morning at 4:30, and I would see the light coming in around the edges of the blacked out window. And I don't know why, but I had a hard time with that adjustment. But anyway, that day we had an itinerary of seeing a couple of waterfalls and a couple of other things. So our first destination was to go to Gullfoss, which was the very big, beautiful waterfall where the tectonic plates come together.
And Gullfoss was about the furthest point on the Golden Circle, so we thought we'd go out there and then work our way back. And when you drive to Gullfoss, you go up and up and up. You really gain a lot of elevation, and I think because of that, it just felt like the weather got more and more intense. The rain was harder, it got a little colder, it was a little windier. And we get to Gullfoss, and we find a place to park, and we're sitting there, and it's not raining.
And we both said, oh, the sun's out. It's pretty nice. We'll leave our raincoats in the car. We got 20 steps away from the car, and it started to sleet and hail.
And blow sideways.
And so
we
ran
sprinted back to the car,
and
put all our stuff on.
yeah,
So Gelfoss sits on the junction of the two tectonic plates, the American one and the European one. And this is the only place where you can see this above the ocean. And it's amazing. It's just this crack in the earth that's very deep. And at this particular point, Gelfoss, a river roars down this gap and goes over a falls and off into the distance. So you hike up kind of above the falls and you get a great view of the water pouring over the falls. So after looking at the falls, I walked down a little ways to where you could get pretty close to the water, where the water went over it. But the blowback there was intense and the weather was intense.
we were all very wet.
We were all very wet and cold, and they had a spectacular
Gift shop.
of all things. I guess they knew they had us.
Yeah.
You know, we would buy anything at that point.
A lot of people.
And a
did.
restaurant, and they sold outdoor clothing, and so we all went in there and warmed up.
Then went back to our car, and then we moved to the geyser. The geyser is actually where the word originated from this place, and that's where they have all the geysers. So,
Yeah.
and the rain was horrible, and it was cold, and it was blowing sideways.
Yeah, there's only one geyser there. And if I'm not mistaken, it's the only geyser in Iceland. And it's not Old Faithful. It's a little gush. A little gush. It goes up about 10 feet. And you sit there with 50 other people with their cameras all out waiting for that little flush. And if you're lucky, you're rolling when it happens, because it only lasts about 2 seconds. And it's a whole series of hot pots with the really cool, the dark blue water, and it was cool just to walk around, and the water's extremely hot. It bubbles up out of the ground there. And then Julie and I, it sits in a valley, and then you can follow a trail that takes you up to the top of a nearby mountain. So we hiked up there, and that was a pretty good walk. And then you've got a great vista of all the hot pots down below. And it's kind of a narrow strip, and on the other side is another spectacular valley. It's just huge and expansive. So that was a cool walk. So we did that. So then we wanted to get some lunch, and
Someone
I think we kind of
had discovered the name of this greenhouse. Well, we walked in and it was warm. Oh my God, it felt so lovely. Very lovely and beautiful greenhouse with all kinds of plants, but it was focused on tomatoes. So it was a tomato greenhouse that grew
like a fourth of the tomatoes that they sell in Iceland and consume in Iceland come from this one facility. It's an enormous automated greenhouse. It's spectacular. It's got sensors on the roof, so when the clouds cover up the sun, the top opens up so more light gets in, and lights come on, and all the water in the place comes from the thermally heated water.
They had a special kind of bee, but it was a bee that was special and was a pollinator for it. They also had a way of controlling bad insects. They had imported another fly that would eat the bad flies. So I know that they had some kind of way of controlling that environment without using pesticides or anything harmful.
You literally sit right next to where all the tomatoes are growing. You can reach over and pluck a cherry tomato right from your table and eat it.
They have beautiful, beautiful menu of tomato bisque. I had a tomato ravioli. They had tomato beer. They had beautiful, the young gal that was our waitress was Icelandic cute gal. After that, we decided, we're still in the Thingvellir area. We're still on the Golden Circle. And so we go back to Thingvellir National Park.
It's kind of a gorge of rock, and it's a place that is famous in Iceland because it was where the chieftains met early on, and it was called the Althing, where they would gather once a year to decide the disputes of the area. So it was kind of a democracy that was formed early on in the right before 900
Wow.
AD, and they met there yearly forever. And so there's a few houses that you can see that are on the plain below this rocky enclave, and that's where the government still meets on occasion, reflecting on their history.
So it was a really beautiful walk along there. It was a very easy walk and lots of different elements. There was one waterfall that came down that was really pretty. Farther down, and again, more elements of wind and rain. We got farther down, and there was another beautiful waterfall. I mean, these aren't the big, high, spectacular ones, but still, they're really nice waterfalls that came through.
We head into our last day, which is basically going back to Reykjavik and on to Keflavik to fly home. And I was, at that point, pretty sick with what turned out to be COVID, but at this point, all I knew is I had a really bad sore throat. But so going back into Reykjavik, we parked near the church and then just kind of went into our familiar area, which Reykjavik is really a small town, and we were going to find a restaurant eventually to have some lunch before we headed out to the airport. But so we went along the harbor and we came across this very famous sculpture, modern sculpture that is sitting on the waterfront. And we took a few pictures there, and it's quite a lovely spot. Mm-hmm. And then moved on to Harpa, which was, of course, that day available to us. And we walked in and saw this very modern, beautiful concert hall with other little amenities within.
It would be very fun to go and sometime and see a concert there. It's an amazing building.
And then we walked back into the town, and we're looking for restaurants, and there wasn't a lot open, it seemed, at that particular time. And so places weren't quite open yet, but we just kept kind of wandering, and then we happened upon just a delightful restaurant. For our last meal in Reykjavik, we hit a very, very good place, and it just happened to be open. We entered, we were the only ones there, and it was a very modern and lovely place. It had very lovely photographs on the walls of scenes, different scenes from Iceland, definitely horses, but also some other lovely places, and we enjoyed our last meal together.
Yeah, so then after that, we just headed back to the airport, which was our flight home, and I believe the flight was pretty quick and easy. I mean, it went really fast.
Not fast enough for me, but...
A couple takeaways for me is, I think we talked about a couple things that stood out was like, one, once you're outside of Reykjavik, there are no billboards. So we realized when we were driving along on these, on the ring road, no billboards along there, very little trash did we see, and no police. We didn't see any police on that ring road at all. So, I mean, those were a couple takeaways. It was just very clean and dramatic and lovely.
I guess the takeaway for me is that even though the weather was bad, I would say a lot of the time we always had moments that would kind of lift your spirit, because the clouds would part and we'd get a little sun, we got a rainbow, we enjoyed it when it was nice. And I have to say, getting home and having summer in Minneapolis was quite wonderful.
Despite the weather, which really was a challenge at times, believe me, it was wind, it was rain, it was sleet, we experienced hail. I think it was still lovely because we were able to take advantage of the fact that there were a lot of other wonderful things happening. And the people we were traveling with, Nancy, Julie, Jim, and I think we all were like, despite the weather, we're going to have a great time. And we were able to embrace the weather and have a wonderful time. The beauty of and the expanse of the area was absolutely amazing, and something that I need to see again because I only got to see a quarter of it, and I need to see the rest.
I guess when people ask me what was my trip like, the things that always come to mind are just how elemental and spectacular it is. You know, the mountains and the glaciers and the ocean and the desert areas and the waterfalls. Everything is just so pristine and so huge that it's just, we only traveled 250 miles the entire week, and I don't think we had a boring second that whole trip. There was always a great hike or a great waterfall or a river or the ocean, something to see, something to experience. And I will just echo what you guys have said, which is it was a great group to travel with. Everybody was very low maintenance. We're all Minnesotans, experienced Minnesotans. We're used to bad weather. We have the layers, we already own the layers, so we were all prepared, and so it was never really an issue. You basically put all your layers on and went out and did stuff, looked around and took photographs, and it was great. And like you said, we only saw a quarter of the island. I'd love to go back and see the rest of it.